How's it going, guys? Graham G.S. Matthews here, back with a special Sunday podcast. Not a normal thing we do here on the channel. I know Sundays are usually reserved for old episodes of Wrestle Rant Radio interviews, miscellaneous videos, so on and so forth. But today I did want to talk about, I did not want to wait until Friday. Friday in the random video blog will probably be breaking down my top 5 favorite Elimination Chamber matches of all time. So today instead, with the Super Bowl being tonight, which I probably will not be watching, just because I really could not care less about football, but that is relevant though. I know tonight's big game is like the Patriots versus, I honestly don't even know. I don't even know who they're facing. That's how disconnected I am from sports. That's relevant because while I could not really care less about football, I do love wrestling, as you guys know. That's probably 95% of the reason why you're subscribed here to the channel. But the reason I bring that up is because I watched the E60 special, or rather 30 for 30. I guess they're two different things. On ESPN on Thursday, on the XFL and Vince McMahon's involvement, Dick Ebersol's involvement, NBC's involvement, and it was fucking phenomenal. It's a fucking phenomenal live special. And I love the NXT one. That's the E60 one they did about 2 years ago on Adam Rose, Corey Graves, Xavier Woods. That was great. And I'm actually going to rewatch that at some point this weekend. Hey, maybe I'll watch that tonight instead of the Super Bowl. Who knows? But no, this one I thought was really, really good. I wish I had taken notes, but at the same time, I'm glad I did not, because they really, more often than not, like when I watch like In Your House shows, or when I watch like Raw and SmackDown, I'm really busy doing other things like writing an article or, kind of half paying attention. Very rarely, when I have my iPad right beside me and I have my computer in front of me and I'm typing away at whatever I'm doing. But with this anyway, I had the iPad right beside me, and I don't get cable here in my room for whatever fucking reason. My college sucks. Just kidding. The cable just does not work in a room. So I watched it on my iPad. I was going to watch it the next day. I had my brother record it, so I'd watch it via Comcast the next day, whatever. But I couldn't wait. I figured, you know what? It's on at 9. I'll watch it, whatever. And like I said, I really could not care less about football, but the story of the XFL, which I knew a little about going in, was fucking fascinating. I thought this entire thing was great. So I can't promise you little details in this review. I'm just giving a brief overview of what my thoughts on it were. But I didn't want to wait until Friday while it's still fresh in my mind. I just watched it a couple days ago, obviously, as it aired live on Thursday. Everything from how it kind of came to be. And I fucking died when they said that Vince, when he first announced the XFL on February 3rd, 16 years ago from this past Friday, interestingly enough, I love the time of this too. I love the timing of this special just because it debuted a day before the 16th year anniversary of when the XFL debuted, and it also came 3 days before the Super Bowl. So the timing could honestly not have been better. But anyway, and I also listened to a podcast on it with Charlie Ebersol, who I believe directed the whole thing on Talk is Jericho, so check that out with Chris Jericho a couple weeks ago, and it was also really, really good, which kind of sparked my interest in this whole thing. But anyway, so what I really found interesting about this, what I really found funny, was that on February 3rd, they announced the XFL a year before its launch. And at the time they did, and this is such a Vince McMahon thing to do, at the time they announced it, they didn't have any teams, they didn't have any coaches, they didn't have any team names, they didn't even have a fucking network. They just announced it because they said they were going to do it and worry about getting it picked up later. That's such a Vince thing to do. That's like announcing, you know what, we're going to do Rock and Cena at WrestleMania, but how we get there, we have no fucking clue. We'll just announce the end game of what we're going to do, and how we're going to get there, we'll figure it out as we go along. Like, you had no idea, and which was so Vince McMahon-like. The more things change, the more they stay the same, I say. And that's apparently evident with this story of the XFL and Vince McMahon. So anyway, Dick Ebersol heard this, who's in charge of SNL, on NBC, the head of the network at NBC, and had been for many, 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 many years, up until his retirement in 2011. And they were good friends anyway, Dick Ebersol and Vince McMahon. I know you've either heard the name before or seen the guy's face. He's all over the WWE stuff just because not only is he a good friend of McMahon's, but he was in charge of Saturday night's main event, really kind of the precursor behind that, really the megamind behind that, as well as Vince, obviously, many years earlier. But with the XFL, they got it on NBC because the NFL had just left NBC, and the XFL was going to fill that void to help bring them back viewers. So I never knew that. It was going to help bring back those viewers, and it was going to take place in the off-season of when the NFL took place, so which was also interesting. I never knew that before either. He Hate Me. I forgot what the guy's name was, but he had He Hate Me on the back of his jersey. He was the most over and probably the best thing to come out of the XFL, which was fucking hilarious. He Hate Me. That's something that we'd hear like someone today say. He hate me. He hate me. He hate me. But apparently it was over in 2001 when the guy debuted on his jersey. And what made the XFL so different was stuff like that. And they said there would be no fair catch. There would be nicknames in the back of the jerseys that they would be able to choose. And one guy chose the name Teabagger, and Vince said, they were like, did you read all the names, Vince, that these guys want on the back of their jerseys? And he said, yeah, I read it all. Did you see what number 87's number was? What his name was? Why, what is it? Teabagger. And I fucking died. That's so hilarious that not even Vince would know what that is, but he would get a big kick out of it. I'm pretty sure, and the commentators were saying, like, we would be made a mockery of. And the same commentators, they brought in a lot of people for this thing. Jesse Ventura was heavily involved. I'm surprised they didn't bring in Jim Ross, who also called a handful of games later on, because the original commentator they weren't a fan of, that he wasn't ready yet, he wasn't calling it the right way. And when I say they, I specifically mean Vince. I think Dick liked this commentator guy. I forgot what his name was, and he did a pretty good job. But like when the scantily clad women come out, the cheerleaders, another big thing that was different from the NFL with the XFL was the cheerleaders and how they dressed, basically wearing nothing. They got camera shots, their fucking crotch of like, you know, up the skirt and like their everything, their tits and everything. It was hilarious. And again, such a Vince thing to do. It was the Attitude Era, really, of the NFL. Like the Attitude Era, and this was right towards the end, really kind of after the Attitude Era died in WWE, after WrestleMania 17. And just the shots they would get were just hilarious. Again, just the stuff they were getting on the camera was hilarious. They would go inside the cheerleaders' locker room, and the promos and the hype was so big around this thing. The first game fucking sucked. The first game was awful. I'm not a fan of football whatsoever, as I previously documented. But even watching some of the clips from that game, like, how can these guys make those kind of mistakes? And a lot of these guys, it was cool for them to get a second chance after being ousted from the NFL for not making it there or whatever. It was pretty much a second-rate NFL, which was what it was called in ESPN. And essentially that's what it was, because the first game was terrible. And they booed the guy from the commentary team. They thought he did a poor job. Everyone walked out of the thing like, wow, this fucking sucked. But the rating went through the roof. It was like a 12-point-something whatever. 12 million, I think it was like a 12-something or whatever on the Nielsen rating scale, whatever. So it did huge numbers. The second game cut that audience in half. It went from like a 12 to a 5. And the game was a lot better. But I think it was the second game that they moved it to Saturdays and used it as a precursor before SNL. But this game ended up being the exact opposite. It ended up being so good, such a great game, that it went into double overtime. It went into fucking overtime twice. So they had to push back SNL. Lorne Michaels, the head of SNL, was pissed over New York. They ended up taping anyway. They didn't want to keep the people in the studio for more than an hour. I guess they ended up taping it around midnight because the game went so late. He was fucking pissed. There was a lot of yelling going on in the line. They had a huge short of electricity that same game, I'm pretty sure. And that fucked up things, and people changed, they switched out of the game. They didn't see the rest of it because the power was out for several minutes, I believe. Not like a couple seconds or even 30 seconds, like 2 or 3 minutes. And that's a long time in TV. Like, no one's going to sit there for more than 2 or 3 minutes and not change the channel. You know what I mean? So that was a big deal. And I guess it was because someone didn't put power in the generator or something fucking dumb like that. Something so simple that they fucked up huge. And it just, their ratings just took a massive, massive nosedive for that game and the following couple games. They went down from a 12 to like a 1. Like by their final few games, the ratings were atrocious. And they signed a 2-year deal. And there's a lot more like little things that go into this stuff. With the cheerleaders, they encouraged that the cheerleaders date the players and the fucking like ringside, like the reporters and on the side of the field. It's like, are you kidding me? It was so funny, like the way they would script shit with the way that it just doesn't really work. Like it worked for wrestling, but didn't really work for the NFL or for the XFL. The NFL's really wrestling ripoff or whatever. I get what they meant. Like, Vince wanted to make personalities out of everybody. That was pretty cool. The way he talked about that and how you really don't know a lot of these guys from the NFL. But with He Hate Me, who was, I really think, the only memorable guy to come out of that organization, they really wanted people to kind of get involved. And, they announced themselves before the games, and the NFL took a couple pages out of their book in terms of how they would, present their games beforehand. Vince was not supposed to be an on-air character or personnel, whatever. And they ended up coming out at the start of the first game and saying, "This is the XFL." Like vintage Vince McMahon, which was hilarious. Jesse Ventura got into it with a couple of coaches who were pissed that their game sucked. Like, it was interesting. Like I said, a lot of this stuff I thought I knew, but I didn't. Like, this was really, really well done. They closed shop after a season. Like I said, they signed a 2-year deal, but the ratings were so bad they knew they couldn't go on. They had to close shop. They announced it on ESPN that following, May or whatever, only months after it launched. And that was it. That was the end of the XFL. And we get a great shot of Dick Ebersol and Vince McMahon. Dick Ebersol I've not seen in a while. Like I said, we see him in WWE documentaries and stuff, but from 10 years ago, with him getting comments from him on Saturday night's main event and other NBC related stuff. We don't really hear or see too much of Dick Ebersol these days, just because he's no longer directly involved with NBC. He left in 2011. He's looking old now. I don't know how old he is now, but Vince is looking better than him, but they're both pretty old. Vince is 71 at this point. I think Dick Ebersol's got to be up there too. But we get this great little scene to close it out of them having dinner together or something. Like a table for three almost, with Dick and Vince. And they're just talking about, well, would you do it again? And Vince, the music gets dramatic, and he goes, "Yeah, I'd do it again." They're like, "No!" But something similar to the XFL, not exactly the XFL. But I would love to see footage of these games. This, I don't know if someone has asked this before. I know maybe the Solid Monster asked or answered a question about it a while ago, and I think the footage belongs to NBC and not, but they have the Saturday night's main event stuff on there. I don't really know, but it would be amazing if they could get the XFL games, for as bad as a few of those games were, probably most of them, if I could be quite honest, from what I saw anyway. If they can get that shit on the network, that would be incredible. But yeah, he's like, "I love you, Vince. I would trust you with my kids. I would trust you with my kids," all this other kind of stuff. And Vince is an emotional guy, for as much as we like to make fun of him for being out of touch or for this and that. He's an emotional, touching guy, and he almost has a little tear in his eye when he says, "I love you too, Dick," and it was pretty cool. So, great way to close it out. In so many words, check it out. I thought it was awesome. Again, I'm not the biggest football fan in the world at all, but I thought this was great. Not just because I'm a wrestling fan. It really had nothing to do with the wrestling, just kind of the little experiment that Vince and Dick had that failed. But it was good. A lot of stuff I did not know. If you're a fan of the XFL, that you were fascinated by it, a lot like I was, but didn't know too much about it, this documentary is for you. As far as where you can watch, and I'm sure they're replaying it on ESPN all the time. I tried to check today. I didn't see anything about it coming up in the next couple hours, today or whatever. And I know ESPN has a link to it on their website. For the last time I checked, it didn't work on Friday, so it might be back up and running. But I just sent a link to it to my dad. It's from YouTube, and it's great quality too. It's not like someone filmed it for an hour on their phone. I don't know how they did it, but they got it on YouTube. But before it's pulled anyway, it might be pulled by this point. By the time you listen to this, but check it out. This was the XFL is the name of the documentary. ESPN 30 for 30. Hopefully it's still on YouTube. It's a great documentary, like I said. It put aside an hour and 19 minutes of your time to check it out without commercials. And it's really cool, really knowledgeable, really enlightening, really entertaining, really funny at some parts. So yeah, I liked it. And also check out the podcast they mentioned before with Charlie Ebersol, Dick's son, who directed the whole thing, I believe. The podcast he did with Chris Jericho about a week or so ago, which will also give you a bit of some of the insight that went into this documentary on ESPN. So again, great stuff. Check it out. I didn't really want to wait until Friday to talk about it. By Friday, I'd probably forget half the shit I just talked about. So I didn't want to save it for Friday's random video blog, or Saturday. I think it's going up this next week, whatever. But anyway, so the next random video blog, goes up on Saturday this coming weekend. Not this weekend, because today's Sunday. Friday, Injection of Inspiration. We're changing the 2 videos for this week only for the a special themed episode of Injection of Inspiration. But Saturday will be my top 5 favorite Elimination Chamber matches, so check that out here on the channel. Just Simple enough. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, like the video, share the video. All that stuff is amazingly appreciated. So if you're watching the game tonight, which as I'm probably sure you are, a lot of people do, it's the fucking Super Bowl. I watched it last year, I think like maybe half the game. It was all right, just because RJ invited me over. The year before that was a great game. I watched it. I think I've watched it every year since I came to college. 2 years ago was great. That was a great game. The year before that, I didn't really care too much about. The game was kind of almost a blowout, really, I think, when the Seahawks won, right? I believe. I don't really remember. I think they're playing the Falcons on Sunday. That's who they're facing. Maybe I'm fucking wrong, but I think that's who they're facing. I'm not a complete idiot, guys. I'm not a complete idiot. So, anyway, bottom line, check it out. This was the XFL ESPN 30 for 30 documentary. Fantastic stuff. Enjoy the game tonight, guys, and I'll catch you folks down the road.